All right, hello everyone. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, welcome to the 7th session in our CWSRF funding process virtual workshop series. This session will be on applying for SRF funding. My name is Kristen Crew from the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. Before we begin, we're going to go over a few logistics and then we can get started. During the webinar today, everyone will be kept on mute to ensure audio quality. If you have a question, please type it into the GoToWebinar question dialog box anytime throughout the session. We will be saving your questions for a facilitated Q&A session at the end of the presentation. After the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email that includes a link to the recording and other information that you may need. You can also download the slides from today in the Handouts tab in your GoToWebinar control panel. This webinar has not been submitted for pre-approval of continuing education credits. Eligible attendees will receive a certificate of attendance for their personal record. To receive a certificate for this session, you must attend for the entire session and register and attend individually using your real name and unique email address. Certificates will be sent via email within 30 days of the webinar date. If you have questions or if you need assistance, please contact smallsystems@syr.edu. Now for a little bit about us. The Environmental Finance Center Network provides training and technical assistance to small water and wastewater systems in all U.S. states and territories through our Building Technical, Managerial, and Finance Capacity programs. If your community or utility needs assistance with drinking water or wastewater system management, please feel free to contact us through our request form, which I will be sharing shortly in the chat. And on that note, we can go ahead and get started. I would like to introduce our presenter for today, Haley Hadjic. Haley is a project manager from the Southwest Environmental Finance Center. Welcome, Haley, and I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kristen. Can you see my screen?
Looks great.
Okay, awesome. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to piggyback off the slide that Kristen just showed you. So for this project, you'll see that we're joined by several EFCs, but we're also joined by Moonshot Missions and Mississippi State University's Water Resources Research Institute. It's funded by the EPA, and while we're doing training and technical assistance for this project, Moonshot Missions is doing really in-depth technical assistance, and MSU is working specifically on on-site and decentralized systems. So we have a really great team with a lot of different knowledge bases. And as mentioned, this is part of the CWSRF series. So you'll see that I've highlighted our webinar right now, but we're also going to have one next month about the documents that you're going to need to apply for SRF funding. And I'll mention them several times in this webinar, but just know that we will be going into more detail next month on them if you have additional questions. If you missed any of our past webinars in this series, not a problem. You can go to our website, which I'm going to put up at the very end of this presentation. And if you click on the Training and Events tab, you're going to be able to find the recordings of all of those webinars as well as be able to download the slides. And this one as well, Kristen will send out the recording and the slides, but you can access it on our website too. So to give you an idea of what we're going to go over today, the first half of this hour will really be about information that you need to gather and have ready before applying. And then the second half of the hour will be about the actual application process. And I'll go more in depth into two specific examples, mention some resources, and then we can go ahead and get to questions. So with that, let's get started. As I mentioned, there's going to be many things that you're going to want to be aware of after you decide that you want to apply for funding, and that'll be things like important dates, funding rates, any kind of subsidies that your system may qualify for, your project may qualify for, and that list goes on and on. So you'll want to gather this information as soon as possible before applying, because having it is really going to help you submit a more successful application. And I think that really starts with the intended use plan, which is really a one-stop shop for most of this information for each state. So if you're not familiar with it, all states have to prepare an intended use plan, which identifies the intended uses of their SRF funds and also describes how those uses are going to support the goals of their SRF program. And this IUP is prepared annually, so there's one for each year. And it's also subject to public comment before your SRF program then submits it to the EPA for approval so that they can get the necessary funding. And these IUPs, they can range from 10 to 11 pages. So for example, Maryland has an 11-page IUP, or they can be much, much longer. Texas has a 205-page IUP. And obviously, a 205-page document has a lot of information in it, and not all of it is going to be relevant to your specific funding application. So on the screen here, I've listed 7 things that I recommend you look up and become familiar with in your state. And most of it you should be able to find in your intended use plan. And you should be able to go into that plan and say, I have project A, now I want to know how much subsidy is available for it, or where it might rank on my state's priority ranking, and be able to tell that from the intended use plan. So I'm going to go over these items more in depth one by one, but first, how do you find your state's IUP? So of course you could Google it and probably be fairly successful, but I also wanted to make you aware of a resource that we have. We call it the State Revolving Fund Switchboard. It's on our Southwest Environmental Finance Center website, and you can see the website down there, but it'll also be at the end of the presentation. And this is just a one-stop shop for funding information. So you click on whatever state you're interested in, and then it'll take you to a web page that has direct links to PDFs of the intended use plan of other funding sources. So I just want you to keep this in mind instead of Googling and digging through. We also have this one-stop shop, which we're going to continue to update so that it has the most up-to-date IUPs and other documents that we're going to talk about today. Okay, so going back to the IUP, let's start with goals. So each IUP has to have long and short-term goals listed, and these goals are intended to justify how the program is managed and to describe the priorities of your SRF program for that specific year. Now you might be asking, why should I care about goals? Sometimes they're kind of cheesy, but actually the goals in the IUP give you a lot of insight into which projects the SRF program may be more interested in funding. So you should think about if your project fits into these goals, and maybe you have a project in mind already, and when you're reading the goals, the primary reason for your project isn't listed, but maybe there's a secondary benefit of your project that does fit within the IUP goals, and that can really help you when it comes to the ranking of the projects. So it's important to read those goals. And if you really want to go above and beyond, you can also look at the annual report. It's a great place to see how states are reporting to the EPA, how they're meeting and exceeding those goals. So I'm going to give you a couple examples. The first is from the most recent IUP draft 2023 for Tennessee, and they have 7 long-term goals and 15 short-term goals. And their long-term goals, a lot of them are fairly generic that you would see for all states, like protect and enhance the water quality in Tennessee by ensuring the technical integrity and long-term sustainability of funded projects. Okay, I mean, that's a great goal, but that's not telling you anything super specific. But I did put one up here that is a little bit more targeted. So one of their goals is about addressing the most significant public health and water quality compliance problems. So what that tells you is that they're probably going to be looking and ranking projects with higher priority that maybe are under an administrative order or have some violations. Then if you look at some of their long-term goals, which I have listed below, you can see that those goals are focusing on water quality protection, non-point source program and funding. One of their goals is to have the SRF allocate up to 18% of grants funds to be used for innovative, green, or resilient projects. So if your project has some sort of green component, some sort of source water protection or water quality component, then there are probably additional points that you can get on your application because of that, because it's one of their priorities, because it's one of their long-term goals. So that's why it's a benefit to look through these. The other example that I'm going to give is Maryland, and Maryland's even more specific. So this is from their 2022 IUP, and they have 4 long-term goals and 8 short-term goals. And you can see funding prioritization for their long-term goal is they really want to address the Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load. And that's also reflected in their short-term goals. So you can see that when it comes to nitrogen reduction, they want to fund projects that target wastewater upgrades for treatment facilities with advanced treatment to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus. And then they're also looking at green infrastructure, water and energy efficiency projects. So those green projects, again, to help restore Maryland's waterways as part of the larger Chesapeake Bay restoration goals. So if you have a project that you're thinking of applying for in Maryland right now, and it can help improve water quality, reduce nitrogen, reduce phosphorus, that's going to get you extra points when it comes to your application and ranking because it's so heavily prioritized in Maryland's goals. So that's why you should go check out the goals in the IUP, both long-term and short-term, but I would say the short-term are probably the most relevant and the most helpful. Okay, the next thing that you want to look at in your state's IUP are the loan terms and rates. By applying for funding, you're obviously anticipating making a significant financial commitment. So it's important that you're aware of the loan terms and the rates ahead of time as much as you can. Most states have this information in their IUP. If it's not in their IUP, it'll be on their website. But first check the IUP and ask yourself these questions. Does the program offer extended loan terms allowed federally? So federally, you can go up to 30 years with your loan, but some states will not allow that, or some states won't allow that for certain projects. So sometimes it'll be up to 20 years. That's obviously really important for you to know because that means that how much you're paying each year could be more if the loan term is fewer years. So that's something to keep in mind. You also want to ask yourself, does the program offer special loan rates or terms for disadvantaged or non-point source projects? Most CWSRF programs offer subsidized interest rates and also additional subsidization, usually in the form of principal forgiveness. And it usually targets disadvantaged communities, green projects, and urgent needs. But that will be spelled out in the IUP, which, or if all of those are subsidies that your state is highlighting that year. And then the last one you want to be familiar with if there are any additional fees to consider, because you want to put that into your financial planning as well. And I'll get into an example right now about what an additional fee might look like. So for this one, this is New Mexico, and this is from their 2022 IUP. So if you are applying for CWSRF funding in New Mexico for that year, they are allowing up to 30 years for their loan term. However, the 30-year term cannot exceed the useful life of the project. So you're going to need to provide documentation to demonstrate the useful life of all construction projects. And this isn't uncommon. A lot of states are not going to allow the loan term to exceed the useful life of the project. And a lot of them will have you provide documentation showing what the useful life is. Then you'll need to know when you're going to actually have to repay that loan. So loans in New Mexico for that year are set up to be repaid in annual installments. And the first annual loan installment is due no later than 1 year after completion of the project. So that's an important date to keep in mind as well, so you know when you're actually going to have to start paying. Then you want to look at rates. So usually it's going to vary and they'll have some sort of structure for you to look at. For this example, they have 0%, 0.5%, and 1% rates. And they do it by if you're eligible for a 0% rate when the per capita income is less than 75% of the statewide average per capita income, and their wastewater system user rates are greater than 1.82 of the per capita income. And so you can read it on the slide there. It's going to change and your interest rate will go up. So if you have a PCI greater than the statewide, then you're going to qualify for the 1%. So that's something to look at too, because that's something that you should be able to calculate. And while it won't be final until you get into the loan terms through the process, at least you'll have a decent idea of what kind of interest rate you may have to pay. So here's when we get into the potential additional fees that are associated with the application. All SRF programs are going to have an administrative fee. New Mexico says that the fee cannot exceed 5% of the total loan amount. It is variable and it's going to be dependent on the term and the interest rate of the loan. And it's included in that interest rate charged to borrowers. And why they have this fee, most states do, is because they deposit it back into that clean water fund and it's used to basically administer the fund for years to come. So just keep in mind, I mean, the fees are usually not a high percentage, but if you have a project that's millions of dollars, that can add up. Okay, the next section of the IUP that I want to talk about and that you should be familiar with is if your project is eligible for additional subsidy, because this could really help your system financially. There has been subsidy in previous years at the CWSRF. You might hear like the term base program CWSRF. That's because sometimes there's a lot of different funding options under the CWSRF. And so the BIL bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law that was just passed, that money is being funneled through the CWSRF as a supplement. And some states are just folding it into their base programs. Some states are having you still apply the same way, but there could be different rules or constraints on that money. But why I mention it is because 49% of the BIL appropriation must be provided as additional subsidies, so loan principal forgiveness. So right now there is more subsidy than there usually is, and so you should definitely think about taking advantage of it if you qualify. There are 4 main categories for subsidies, as you can see on screen. So affordability, stormwater projects, energy or water efficiency projects, and then sustainable project planning, design, and construction. So your state could decide to subsidize stormwater projects that could be green and gray. They could subsidize energy or water efficiency projects or some sort of sustainable project planning. I know some states will direct their subsidy to things like pre-development loan funds and subsidize those. When it comes to that sustainable project budget, states are allowed to define what they mean by sustainable. So there's a lot of flexibility and differences between states. And your state's IUP should detail which projects are proposed to receive additional subsidies each year. And then you can use this to understand other comparable community funding packages. But it, again, depends on your IUP. Some of them aren't always clear. Also, some states do choose to do pet projects for subsidies, like lead service lines. I know that Illinois is using some of their BIL subsidy money for regionalization projects. Texas is an example I'm about to give, and they're targeting specific activities. So they're targeting green projects, emergency preparedness, and very small systems. So it's going to depend state by state, and you'll probably get tired of hearing me say that. I will be tired of saying that. But because these SRF programs are administered by the state, EPA gave them a lot of flexibility of how they want to prioritize and spend their money. So this is an example I have here. It's from the Texas IUP, and their program offers subsidized interest rates and additional subsidization in the form of principal forgiveness. And it's offered to eligible disadvantaged communities, green projects, and urgent need projects. So they put it in a table, which I find is really helpful. It's not always a table. Sometimes it's in paragraph form, But on the left, the funding options, the first 5 are the ones that are eligible for that subsidy, and they tell you how much money they have for that subsidy, the type of principal forgiveness, and other information. So that's why I highly encourage you to look up the IUP to find this information. They also go into more detail in paragraphs, which is probably what you're going to see on other IUPs too. So for their emergency preparedness, they say that they're going to give some subsidy for emergency preparedness evaluation and audits plans. When you're looking at subsidized green funding for the subsidy, they're going to do principal forgiveness if the project elements that are considered green and the cost of the green portion of their project is 30% or greater than the total project cost. And then they go more into the types of goals of the green project that would qualify for subsidy. So that's something that you're looking for when you have a project. Can you qualify for any of these? I just want to pull out this subsidy, disadvantaged communities, and affordability. It's kind of used interchangeably. So on the drinking water side, they definitely stick with disadvantaged communities. For some reason, on the clean water side, sometimes they say disadvantaged communities, sometimes they say affordability. So if you see that, it's the same thing. But states, again, develop their own criteria for what they consider a disadvantaged community. And usually it's based on income, unemployment, and population trends. Right now, a lot of states are revising their definitions. So if you've applied in previous years and didn't qualify, it might be worth looking up your state's definition again. It should be in the IUP to see if you now qualify. Some states are using tools like the one you see on the screen. So they're getting a little bit more complicated of how to determine if you're a disadvantaged community or not. But I will say it's important that you know what kind of data sources the state is using to define a disadvantaged community. That way you can look at those same sources and have the same information. There are also other factors that they may consider. So they may look at percent of population in poverty in a certain year, potentially percent of population over 65, environmental justice areas, percent not in the workforce, percent on SNAP benefits, home sales, residential user bill delinquency rates. These are also common factors that states have considered. I'm going to give an example in New Mexico. So this is from their draft IUP for 2023. And this is how they're determining affordability criteria. So their categories are income, population or population trends, or unemployment. And all of the points add up to 150. So there's a possible 150 points. And any community that receives a score of 50 points or higher is eligible to receive that additional subsidy. So if you're looking at income, it's pretty basic. The criteria is service area of project has a per capita income of 80% or less than the national average. Population and population trends, they're looking by county or by municipality or service area. And then they also give exceptions if your population has declined in the previous 5 years. And then for unemployment, they're looking at municipality, county, service area unemployment if it's higher than the national average. And so we'll give you points and add it all up. And their data is from the American Community Survey, which is the US Census Bureau data. And this is the most common data set and it's easily accessible to you, so you can find out what your points would be here. But again, check that data source so you know that you're calculating the points correctly. Okay, so we've reached the point, we do have 2 polls in this presentation just to make sure everyone's paying attention and focusing. So this first poll, we actually had to shorten it for it to fit on GoToWebinar. So instead of saying stormwater projects, it's going to say stormwater. But basically the question I'm asking you are, what are the 4 main categories of additional subsidy? And Kristen's going to put that on the screen. And that could be A, affordability, stormwater projects, energy or water efficiency projects, planning, assessment projects. I don't think I need to read every single one to you, but it goes on like that. So what are the forming categories of additional subsidy?
All right, and get those answers in. I will be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. All right, Haley, it looks like 40% got the answer correct with B, stormwater, affordability, sustainability, and efficiency.
Yes, so it's a little bit tricky. I know there's a lot of words in there, but the forming categories that your state will definitely have one of are those stormwater projects, affordability, sustainable projects, which I put in quotation marks because again, the state defines what sustainable means, and then energy or water efficiency projects. All right, moving on. So that was the first section of the presentation where we talk about all the information you should try to gather before you actually go into the application process. And now we're going to go over the actual application process.
Haley, I can't see your screen right now.
Oh, let's see. I'm trying to. Okay, how about now?
There we go.
Okay, sorry about that. Thanks, Kristen.
Also, I got a comment. Do you mind changing the Zoom? Actually, I can do it. Let me see. There we go. Okay, perfect. Carry
What
on.
did it look like? Did it look weird?
It was just taking over the screen. I had a comment that it was too large, that the font was too large, but I just had to change the zoom on it. So that looks good.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for whoever made that comment. Okay, so we'll go over the general application process here. This is the general layout. First, I'd like to say that dates are super important here. Some states have rolling applications, meaning you can apply anytime during the year or maybe 4 times during the year. But a lot of states only accept application once a year. So you're going to have to be aware of that. And this is a very general overview of the application process because it's super, super state specific about each step and what they'll require. But in general, I would say some states do require applicants to participate in some sort of pre-application meeting that will guide them through the application process. This is very helpful. Actually, it's great if your state does this because then you're going to be informed about all of the requirements if you're going to need a water conservation plan or any kind of reports or water loss audits that you may have to submit. So sometimes before you can even start an application, you might have to go to some sort of meeting. Then usually there's going to be some sort of project information form that you're going to have to submit. It could be called something different by each state, but it's usually a form that's 2 to 5 pages that's asking general information about your project. So you'll submit that. Sometimes that's a point where some states will require additional documents like a PER or something like that. They'll let you know if that's when that occurs. In addition to that project information form, some states require supplemental applications. So Texas, for example, after you submit the project information form, they have a financial assistance application that provides instructions on the legal, financial, engineering, and environmental information required for them to prepare a recommendation to the board to fund your projects. And so it'll ask you some questions relevant to those categories. So once you get past that project information form or any other additional supplemental application, then it's going to be reviewed and scored by the SRF program. Usually they'll do this within a couple months. And this also, once they create and score all of the projects, this could also be a time where then they come back to you and ask for additional information about your project, like a preliminary engineering report or some sort of feasibility studies, if they don't ask about it earlier on, like during the project information form stage. So once they've gone through and scored and reviewed all of the projects, then they're going to generate a priority ranking list. Sometimes it's also called a priority project list, PPL, and that's available to you, that's available to the public. And then you'll also be notified if you're one of the systems that made it on the list and is funded. And then once they gather all of those additional documents, make sure that you are ready to proceed, they make the funding offers. So this is the most general I can do of an overview of the actual process. I'm going to go in depth on 2 examples, so you'll get to see more of the nitty-gritty, but that's the general process. So to highlight a couple more things from that process, first the scoring and priority ranking. So another component of that IUP that you'll want to look at is the project priority list. All treatment works projects have to be on that list. They can be in any order, but usually number 1 has the highest number of points in the rate when they did the rating, and so on. But that's not always the case, so you can check. And in general, non-point source projects don't have to be on the project priority list, but most of them are anyways. And states have tremendous flexibility when they're deciding on their ranking criteria, and they base it on their priorities and on their goals. So the ranking criteria for each state is completely different. Some could focus on compliance issues, some could focus on green and innovative projects, some on best management practices. Again, that's why I mentioned those goals, because the ranking is the criteria for the ranking is going to directly reflect what their goals and the state priorities are. However, I will say that time and time again, states weigh readiness to proceed as a big factor. So most states will have that in their ranking criteria, and some will weight it very heavily. I know the Oklahoma criteria, readiness to proceed, is where you can get the most points. And readiness to proceed is basically how long is it going to be until this project is ready to be real. You're ready to start construction, because they want to move their money. It's a revolving fund, so the faster they can get the money out the door, the faster they can get money back in. So they really like to see that you are ready to go with your project. And this can also be really important for larger states, because ranking can be really competitive and there's a ton of systems that are applying. So anything that you can do to get more points to get your project ranked higher, the better. So here's an example from Colorado. This is their most recent IUP 2023. They have a fantastic IUP. You can find all of the information there. And so I've just pulled some of their ranking criteria. Usually this is how to look for your state. They'll have these broader categories. So water quality improvement criteria, financial affordability criteria, permit compliance, sustainability, green project reserve, and then they'll have subcategories under that where they're going to rank your project with points based on each one of these subcategories. So you can see it starts with project addresses a water quality impairment. If you look at the green side, project incorporates one or several of the following planning methodologies: regionalization and consolidation, promoting sustainable utilities, or communities through XYZ. So you can look this up before you even submit your project to see what points you think you can grab. And maybe there's some other areas that you don't have quite yet, but you know that you could get those documents together before you actually submit the application. And just to show more of their ranking, I wanted to point out that they have a readiness to proceed section. And so these are easy points if you can prepare before your application is due. So readiness to proceed, project has secured the following: plans and specifications approved. Project implements one or more of the following planning instruments: watershed management plan, source water protection plan. Oftentimes, asset management plan will be listed under that. That's something that you can get together and work on months before submitting your application, or even while the initial information form is being processed and reviewed, and show that you have those additional planning forms to get those extra points. Here's an example of their criteria for Maryland, and I didn't give all of the sections underneath, but I wanted to point this out because we looked at the Maryland goals at the beginning of this, and their goals are really reflected in this criteria. So their criteria for ranking is based on water quality and public health, and it focuses a lot on nitrogen removal, phosphorus removal, any kind of water quality benefits to help that Chesapeake Bay initiative that they have, that they stated in their goals. And also they focus on co-benefits as well. So climate adaptation, resiliency, or sustainability elements. So you can see their ranking criteria is very different than Colorado's, but it clearly reflects what they mentioned in their goals. Since I've been harping on readiness to proceed, I want you to think about these questions when you're considering your project. So ask yourself, how ready does your project need to be in order to get ranked? Does the state offer planning funds to get projects ready for construction? Can your project create a schedule to get to construction within a year? Because that will show readiness to proceed. And are there milestones that your project must hit or else it's going to get bypassed? Many states will, at minimum, require some level of readiness to proceed to even get on their list. But some states won't make that a requirement, but they'll give extra additional priority points if you do have something like that. And so most states should give some sort of definition or example what they mean by readiness to proceed. So in Texas, they define readiness to proceed as projects having no significant permitting, land acquisition, social, contractual, environmental, engineering, or financial issues that would keep the project from proceeding in a timely manner to construction. So go ahead and look up what your state expects for readiness to proceed. So once they do the ranking with the criteria, they're going to create that project priority list or that project ranking list. And it's basically going to be some large spreadsheet, but it's something that you can easily look up. So the example I have here is from Michigan, and this is kind of as basic as it gets. It's not giving you a ton of information about the projects. It also doesn't provide the number of points that each project received. A lot of the project priority list will actually show how many points the project got, and will have more of a description of what the actual project is. And that way you can compare your project to similar projects. And while you don't have all of the documents or all of the information, you can kind of see where those projects ranked on the project priority list. Okay, so now we're going to go into two in-depth examples of the application process for two specific states, so you can see how they differ, but also still kind of follow that general application process that I described earlier. The first is Tennessee. And so we have a little timeline here. Tennessee is one of the states that only accepts applications once a year. And their SRF program will actually send out solicitations to systems to apply for clean water SRF funding. And they usually do this in January with a February deadline. And so systems need to complete and submit what they call a clean water questionnaire. In February, think of the clean water questionnaire as that project information form. Again, as I mentioned, states are going to call it different things, but it's all pretty similar. It's a basic form asking information, general information about your project. And then this is when they'll also tell you if you need to provide any other supporting documentation. So that's submitted in February. And then March through April, the SRF will review and rank all of the submitted projects. And then they're going to submit their priority ranking list that's going to be released usually early summer, usually in June. And so if your community has made this list in Tennessee, you're going to receive a funding letter with information on next steps. And communities will need to also demonstrate their readiness to proceed at that time. So this is actually a benefit, because if you submit that general information questionnaire in February, then you could be using February through September to make sure that you have all those additional documents to demonstrate your readiness to proceed. Some states will require you to submit that in February, but Tennessee, you do have those months in between where you could be getting them together. So readiness to proceed, to do this, they're going to have to submit several documents to an online portal. The first one is that for all projects, they have to submit a letter requesting funding for the project. They also have to submit the last 3 fiscal years of audited financial statements. This is not uncommon. A lot of states are going to ask for audited financial statements, so it's something that you should prepare ahead of time. Sometimes it's 5 years, sometimes it's 3, just depends on the state, but it's usually a requirement. They also require them to submit current water and sewer user rates. That's not uncommon either. And then for projects that have a construction component, they'll have to turn in a PER, a facilities planning document, an engineering agreement, plans and specifications, and documentation of acquired easements. So some spattering of those documents will probably also be required for any of your construction projects. But again, when in the application process that will occur depends on the state. So then finally, their SRF program will conduct a financial sufficiency review, basically a financial audit, and looking at the user rates to determine if that system has sufficient revenue to support the infrastructure improvements. So that's the last big step. So once that occurs and they're deemed sufficient, then the SRF actually sends them an additional formal loan application. You fill it out as a system, you submit it back, then the SRF program will present that application, that project, to the Tennessee Local Development Authority for approval. This process, at minimum with no complications, will take about 3 months. So as you can see from the actual funding application opening up in January, the whole process will probably wrap up in November or December. So it's a really long process, but if you're thinking about applying for funding in Tennessee now, that's actually great. You know that the next opportunity is going to come next January, February. So you have several months to hopefully go through the IUP and gather all the documents that you're going to need, because you'll want them ready to go for January so you can go through this whole process next year. So I just wanted to show you what that kind of, they called it, I believe, the Clean Water Questionnaire, that general information form that they have to fill out. I want you to see it because some version of this is usually applicable to every state. They'll have some version of this. So I skipped section 1 and 2 because that's just contact information and information about the system. So section 3, they then ask you about your project. They ask you what type of project and what type of loan you're looking at. They want to know the loan date that you'd like it, and also the loan term. Then in section 4, they're going to ask you general information about the project. So the primary reason for the project is a drop-down selection. I put it on the right there for you, but this doesn't tell a ton of information. So I would highly recommend, if there's any section that you can put comments in, you should comment and again, go back to those goals in the IUP and make a case for why your project will also help the SRF program reach those goals. So in addition to that, you're going to have to do project location, estimated number of people who it's going to benefit, and then a detailed description of your project. All of these will also have construction start and construction completed dates. Of course, those are anticipated You never completely know, but they want to have an idea of how long the construction will take. Then section 5, again, is all about demonstration for readiness to proceed. So are the plans and specifications 100% complete for the project? Is the planning document complete for the project? Here you don't have a lot of wiggle room to say, you know, the planning document is 95% complete, but it's not 100% complete. So you'd have to select no. So that's why it's really important, if you can find out by downloading this early, find out what documents you're going to need to have, because then you can make this a more successful application. Section 6 is about permits and environmental. This will be a section that every general application will have as well. And then the final section is all about cost. And if you have any additional funding sources, they also like to see that. And if it falls into the green project funding category as well. So as you can see, it's not super long, this general form, and you're able to download it ahead of time so you know what to expect. And so you'll fill out this and, you know, certify it, sign it, send it off, and that will start your funding process. Okay, the next one I'm going to go in depth about is the Colorado application process. This one is definitely more complicated. It's also a more competitive process, so I think that's partially why. So it starts off with actually pre-qualification. Systems are required to submit and complete an eligibility survey. And then the SRF program, once they look at that survey, they're going to schedule a pre-qualification meeting with you. And during that meeting, they'll discuss the project, and they'll also do preliminary engineering and credit determinations. Again, it's really a benefit if you get a meeting out of this, because then you have a point of contact that can help you through this whole process right away. The next step is the project needs assessment. Again, kind of like the preliminary information form, just by a different name. And so systems are going to have to complete and submit that. They also have to do a cost and effectiveness and fiscal sustainability certification. And the SRF program also finalizes their environmental determination during this stage. After they submit their project needs assessment, then we move on to design and engineering. So the system has to complete any kind of engineering planning or any kinds of plans and specifications. They have to gather all of that information during this phase. And they also have to do a process of design report as the SRF program is reviewing their project needs assessment. So then the next step, the requirements prior to loan application. So as the system is working on the documents that I mentioned in the last step, the SRF program is reviewing your project needs assessment and hopefully approving that in this step. And then during this time, they also expect you as a system to hold a public meeting about the project that you want funded and why. This is an unusual requirement. Not all states are going to require you to have a public meeting, but keep in mind some will. So once that project needs assessment is accepted, the system will submit all those other documents that they've been working on, and then we move to the loan application. So finally, you're allowed to submit the official loan application with all of those documents, with the approved project needs assessment. The SRF agency is going to review, they're going to rank, and then ultimately it'll go to the authority board for review and approval. And then you have the loan execution. Applicants, you would obtain the final design approval, obtain the final environmental clearance, and then the authority executes the loan. So a lot more steps here, but I will say if you're from Colorado, they have a fantastic CWSRF site. They have lots of diagrams and they have a ton of resources. So this is from the website. This is just one section, and then you can see I did a screenshot of the apply for a loan, and it goes through each step. And I also took a screenshot of that second step, project needs assessment / environmental determination. I know it sounded like a lot of documents that you had to turn in, and it is, but they make it so easy because they give you that environmental determination checklist. They give you a template for you to fill out. We love a good template. And then they also give you agency contact lists if you need any kind of help. And they do that for each one of these steps, even for the public meeting. They give you guidance, they give you templates. So you're not having to create all of these on your own. So great website for Colorado. And just to give you a quick idea of what those forms would look like, this is the environmental determination, the checklist that you'll have to do. So a lot of that you'll already have filled out in the needs assessment you can pull from, so the project description, if it's going to improve or maintain water quality, that's probably stuff that you've already put in that initial application. And then it goes more into physical aspects, the topography, the geology, the climate, the population. So that's something that you're going to have to fill out. If you have done a PER or other documents in the past, you can probably get a lot of this information from those other documents. Okay, so with that, I just have a couple recommendations if you are ready to apply for funding or you think you want to apply for funding. The first thing I think you should do is go find your state's IUP and read it. Identify those goals, find out what subsidies are available, if your system or project qualifies for those, what kind of loan terms and rates you could be looking at. Then go to your state's CWSRF website. Some of them are absolutely wonderful. Some of them are incredibly frustrating, but that should give you information about important dates, when you need to apply. They should have a ton of additional handouts for you to do more research. And a lot of them will actually have webinar recordings describing their individual state process. I know that Texas does that. And then if you are able to, I highly recommend that you download that initial application, that initial project information form. So you, again, have more information about what kind of material you're going to have to pull together for this application. And then finally, contact your state's CWSRF program and ask questions, especially if you're from a state that doesn't have the best CWSRF website. It's hard to navigate, or maybe not all of the documents are there or up to date. Please reach out to them earlier, the better, so it's not wasting your time trying to navigate or read between the lines or figure out exactly what they're asking you. They are there to help, and so are we. I'll get into the technical assistance that we can provide you through this process in a minute, which is completely free, but I just want to close before we go into additional resources with a poll. So I hope this one is kind of obvious. The question is, where can you find additional information on the CWSRF application for my state or other helpful resources to improve my application? And this one is multiple choice. And so can you find information in the intended use plan? Is a project priority list helpful? Is your CWSRF website helpful? Is our SWEFC State Revolving Fund Switchboard going to be helpful? And as a reminder, that's your one-stop shop of funding links and information for all of the states. So you can select as many of these as you want.
All right, and get those answers in. I'll be closing the poll in just a couple seconds. All right. All right, Haley, so everyone was right, but 87% of people did choose my state's CWSRF website. 64% of people said my state's intended use plan. 42% said the project priority list, and 53% said the Southwest EFC's State Revolving Fund Switchboard.
Okay, thank you. Can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. I don't know why it didn't work last time. Yes, so as Kristen said, you're all correct. All of those are fantastic resources that I highly recommend you use all 4 of them. But you can find the most information, including the intended use and the priority ranking list, on your state's CWSRF website. So a couple other resources I want to point you to. Don't worry about writing these down quickly. We're going to send out these slides so you can just use them. But EPA does have all of the state contacts for the CWSRF programs available. You can also contact EPA regional offices, their CWSRF contacts. And then we, the EFC network, also have what we call funding tables by states. So this isn't specifically CWSRF focused. Basically, each year we compile all of the funding sources we can possibly find for each state for water and wastewater. So you still have the CWSRF on there, but we have a ton of other funding sources in your specific state that you can find all in one place. And we do a general overview of the purpose of the funds, how to apply, the website, and then the primary contact for that fund. And these again are updated once a year. They can be found on our website. And then here's just again the contact, the email, the website address for our SRF switchboard. We also call them info hubs sometimes. And then EPA has a general CWSRF fact sheet that can give you a very general overview of the program and eligible projects, but it's really worth going to your state because each program is so specific and individualized. And then I'll just wrap up by saying under this project, we're fortunate to be able to provide free, completely free technical assistance, and this could be remote or in person. Here are some of the areas that we can provide assistance on, but definitely not all of them. And when it comes to funding, we can really help you through the process. We can help you actually populate some of the documents that you're going to need. We can help you find the relevant information and just help you walk through the whole process because it's so long and kind of intimidating. So you can either email us or you can go to the EFC network website and we have that Get Help button. And there it'll bring you to a page where you can actually fill out your technical assistance request. I promise it's super short, very general information, just name, contact information, and the kind of help that you're looking for. And we'll make sure that it goes to one of our EFCs who specializes in whatever subject you're interested in getting assistance with, and they'll reach out to you. Just a reminder that next month we're going to have another webinar in this series on August 17th, and this one is going to be all about documents needed to apply for SRF funding. And you can find all of our trainings, view the recording, and download the slides on our website as well. So with that, I will open it up to questions and leave my contact information up here. And here is the Environmental Finance Center Network website.
Awesome, thank you, Haley. So we don't have any questions currently, but I will leave the question box open. So if you have any questions, get those in the next minute or two.
I'm just going to take that everyone understood exactly what I was saying, and it's so clear now how to apply for funding.
I think that's the exact situation, Haley.
We also have the SWEFC website on the bottom left. That's the website where you can fund, or where you can find the funding switchboards.
Also, hot off the presses, we have a new animation on SRF funding. So I don't know if we could get the link on the chat, but it's brand new.
Yes.
I just sent it out to everyone. James says that was very well done. Great info. Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Bernadette says, thank you, Haley, just approaching all this section by section so as to not get ahead of myself.
Very good plan. It can be daunting and overwhelming and lots of phrases.
All right, doesn't look like we have any questions, so I'll go ahead and thank you, Haley, for sharing your expertise with us today. Following this webinar, each of you will receive a follow-up email with the slides from today, as well as a link to the recording. We ask that you please complete the webinar evaluation following this webinar so you can let us know your thoughts on today's session. This helps us plan future webinars on topics that are important to you. Thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you at future EFCN events.